Well, hello everyone. Welcome back. We're in chapter 7 this week, and we're going to be looking at the hiring process specifically. We're going to be looking at selection. Selection involves, and we're going to mention this a little bit more in detail as we go into the presentation, but selection involves the acquisition, it involves the deployment, and it involves the retention of individuals. And those are three important elements if we're going to be in the world of selection. And many people today call it staffing, so I may use those words interchangeably. But today, let's go ahead and take a look at selecting human resources. Well, welcome back, everybody, and today we're in Chapter 7, which deals with selecting human resources. Now, it's important to understand when we talk about selecting human resources, what we're really talking about is staffing. Now, staffing involves three elements. It requires acquisition, which means bringing people into the organization. It means deployment, which is moving them into the right positions. And then it deals with retention, which means keeping them and understanding why, if they leave, why they do so. So the first slide here deals with that acquisition phase. It talks about selection and placement. So let's take a look at these two concepts here at the beginning. So, selection deals with choosing individuals with the correct qualifications needed to fill jobs in an organization. Now that sounds fundamental, and it fairly well is. What you're doing is trying to find people who will be able to accommodate the organization's needs, and that goes from putting out a want ad in the newspaper or on electronic media to being able to identify how many you need, how you're going to bring them in, orientation, mentoring, and all of that. All of this deals with selection. Placement is putting them in the right job. It's not so much that you hire them, but you need to have several things going for you if they're going to be successful and if you're going to expect them to stay with the organization. So you want to make sure there's a right fit for that person in that organization. And part of the way that we have come to determine the likelihood that a person will stay is through the attraction, selection, attrition theory. And really all this theory posits is that people who are attracted to the firm, if they share common beliefs, values, if they feel like they fit in, chances are they're going to stay. When the opposite is true, then chances are they're not going to stay. So the more the person feels like he or she is a part of that organization, the more likely that person is going to be able to stay and give you some longevity and productivity. Now, how do we know if that placement is correct? It's more than just looking at the person's abilities. We have to consider several other entities as well, and this is where placement comes in. Placement involves the person-organization fit. Does this person fit the organization? I remember one time I was interviewing for a position at a college, and they were needing a admissions director, and everything went fine. The interview went fine, but at the end, the guy asked me if I had any questions. And just as a side note, always have some insightful questions, maybe two insightful questions that lets them know that you've done your research and you are there to really get to know and be a part of the organization. Don't ask them when vacation starts and how much does it pay and all of that. Those are just superficial questions that we already know you're going to want to know, and that'll be covered. But I asked this individual, would you tell me how the culture is here at this organization? And he stopped for a minute and thought about it, and he said, it's a hostile environment. He said people are against each other. They're climbing over each other to get to be able to move up in the corporate ladder. So after he had really unloaded the truths about the organization, I discovered I didn't want to work there in the first place. So some of these truths you need to be able to find right from the very beginning, and it would save you time. You may have the skills needed for that organization, but do you fit that organization as a professional, as a person, and as a Christian? Now, the person group fit. How do you relate to other people, particularly in groups? Can you work with people? And you've probably seen on a lot of these job announcements the ability to work with teams and other people. So being able to work with groups is important. And then finally, you have within the person group fit, you have what's called a mismatch, where that person's needs and interests and values just don't meet the group or the organization's values. So it's best to, again, get to know that person beforehand before you put them in a situation that's destined for failure. So person-organization fit, person-group fit, matching them appropriately is needed. And then finally, when it comes to placement, we have the person-job fit. And that's the more traditional route that people take when they are placing individuals in an organization. And that's the person having the requisite KSAs, knowledge, skills, and abilities to be able to do the job. That's the hard skills that we look for. A person's ability to operate a computer, or having a bachelor's degree, or this, that, or the other. These are the hard skills that the person needs to be able to have if they're going to be successful in that company. Now, some of the HR employment functions, of course, they receive applications. And today with the internet, we can receive them electronically. There's still the old-fashioned mail. I don't know of too many people who do it that way, but you still have that function. Interviewing the applicants, administering pre-employment tests, which can be manual tests, it can be written tests, it could be placing a person in a situation and watching how they respond. So there are all types of pre-employment tests. Background screening is important today, especially when you're looking at the number of violent activities going on in the workplace. And with diversity the way it is, you want to make sure you do a comprehensive background screening on everybody. Physical exams may be required depending upon the job. And then placing and assigning new employees. That's getting them in the place where they need to be and having them adjust to that new environment or new workstation. Orienting and onboarding new hires. Orientation is probably one of the most important aspects of the new hire process because you want to make sure that they get a positive experience right from the very beginning. Coordinating evaluations on these new employees, seeing how they are adjusting and how well they're assimilating into that environment. Conducting exit interviews when employees do depart. Our job is to do that as well. And maintaining appropriate records and reports. So that goes without saying. You're going to be doing reports and records from the very beginning of that person's career all the way till the end or when they leave or whatever the case may be. Now the next slide talks about selection criterion predictors. Now we want to be able to judge or gauge how well a person is going to perform once we do hire them. Well, how do we do that? Well, one of the formulas that have been around for a while is this one, and that's the best predictor of future behavior is past behavior. Why do we ask for resumes? Well, we want to see what they've done in the past. We want to collect a history of that person. The organization maintains records so that people can evaluate how that company has performed over the years and so forth. So past behavior can oftentimes predict future behavior. Now, when we talk about predictions, we have, first of all, selection criterion, and that means the person must have the certain characteristics to be able to perform a certain job. Let's say, for instance, if you're a mechanic, you must be able to work on engines, or you must be able to repair certain things on a car and use certain tools. So that would be the criterion for that job. But now, how do we know if the person can work on a engine or be able to work with certain tools? Well, we have predictors of the selection criteria, and these are measurable or visible indicators of selection criteria. We may require that they show us a license, that they are certified to be a mechanic. We may have them go in and point out different parts of an engine that they would be working on. They may be asked to perform certain functions to be able to demonstrate that they know what they're doing. So all of these would be a good predictor of the selection criteria. Now, let's say, for instance, a person is going in for an office assistant. One of the criterions would be that they would have to be able to work with Word, Office, Word, and PowerPoint, and all of that. And the predictor would be to show certifications of that, or to get on the computer and demonstrate how they would operate Word and PowerPoint and so forth. And being able to do that would be a predictor. So if they did do well after doing this predictor or test, then we could say that they have a good chance at being able to do that job. Now, when it comes to prediction, we also want in our measurements, our assessments, what's called reliability and validity. Reliability is the extent to which a measure is repeated and produces the same results over time. Let's say I gave a person a test on a Monday, and they came back Tuesday and Friday and scored the same score. That test could be reliable, or you could say it's reliable because it's yielding consistent results. But that doesn't necessarily mean that the test is valid. Valid means that it is testing what it's supposed to be testing. I mean, you may be given a simple math test on Monday. 1 + 1 = 2, 5 + 10 = 15, and so forth. And you score 100 on Monday, and then you come back on Tuesday and score 100, and you score 100 on Friday. Well, that test is reliable, but what if you are interviewing for a office assistant, or if you're interviewing for a executive position in being director of admissions for a college? The test may not be that valid. It may be reliable, but is it measuring what you would need it to measure to predict the success of a person in that particular job? So for a test to be usable in staffing for selection criteria and as a predictor of selection criteria, it needs to be reliable and it needs to be valid. Now, establishing criterion-related validity, you have concurrent validity, and this is measuring your current employees on different types of areas that is pertinent to their job, and you do that over a period of time during their employment, and you can score their performance ratings off of it. It may be achievement tests, it may be aptitude tests, or proficiency tests, and so forth. Predictive validity, you're still measuring a person, but instead of it being current employees, predictive validity means that you are assessing people who want to come into the organization. So you're looking at the person before as an applicant, and then you look at their job performance once you bring them in to see whether or not those measurements or that test is a good predictor of their future performance. Now, there are legal considerations. You have job relatedness. Everything that you do for that employee or to screen that employee or assess that employee, even that a potential employee has to deal with the job that they are applying for. You can't give a math test to someone and they are looking at being an office assistant. That's not related to the job, and you can be held liable for that. Business necessity. Your practice is necessary for safe and efficient operations. So you want to make sure that the test is not only related to the job, but that their level of predictive validity and criterion-related issues will make it to where that person can safely and efficiently do that job once they or if they are hired. And then the test is any method of collecting information about that applicant. Now the last slide that we're going to look at deals with selection process. And here we talk about the realistic job preview. If you remember a few slides back, I told you that that individual, when I asked him the culture or the climate of the organization, he said it was very hostile. Well, he gave me a realistic job preview. And a realistic job preview is going to give you, or the employee or the applicant, the pros and the cons of the organization. They're going to talk about the good, but they're also going to talk about the weak areas of the organization. A lot of times some people will, in their haste to try to get someone in the company, they may embellish on the good and really not talk about anything negative. The military does that in recruiting. They'll tell you all the benefits of that particular branch, how you're going to see the world maybe, how they're going to pay for college and this, that, and the other. But what they don't tell you is the long, arduous hours. And I'm saying this because I was a military recruiter for 10 years. But they won't tell you the long, arduous hours, the rigid discipline that you have to be able to possess, the dangerous nature of the job itself. So a realistic job preview will give that person both the pros and the cons of the organization. Now, what's the difference between doing that and embellishing, which is the sales approach to staffing? Well, the sales approach will bring more people into the organization. However, when they realize that this isn't what I thought it was going to be, some of them may leave the organization because they just were not prepared for the reality of the environment or the job itself. Now, a realistic job preview, you may have fewer people go through the hiring process once you've told them the pros and the cons, but you do have the benefit that once they're there, chances are they're going to stay because they already know what to expect. They're not caught by surprise. There's nothing hidden from them, so they can make an assessment right from the very beginning. So your retention is going to be higher using the realistic job preview rather than the sales approach. Some of the ways that you can incorporate a realistic job preview, as you see here, you can use videos of the company, you can take pictures, and you can get employee testimonials, job shadowing. So several different options are there. You can take them around and show them the workplace, but you have to be careful so that you're not implying a contract or employment at that time. You just want to give them a realistic prediction or a realistic assessment of that organization so that they know exactly what they're doing. And as you see here, applicants may withdraw if they don't think the job is a good fit. Now, it's better, and I believe I mentioned this earlier, it's better to let them go at the very beginning, because when you take a look at the investment you're already having to make with the bringing them in, the interview process itself, when you take a look at the orientation and all of the time and money that you're spending with that person, only to have them leave in a couple of weeks or months, it's not cost effective. It would be better to go ahead and tell them everything up front and let them go ahead and go if they want to go, so that you can be busy trying to find the next person who would be a right fit for that organization. So both have their advantages and disadvantages, but I believe as far as cost effectiveness and overall validity to the staffing program, you would use a realistic job preview in all of your interviews. And that's going to bring us to the end of today. So I will continue on tomorrow with Chapter 7 as we continue with selecting human resources. Well, as you can see, selection involves more than just placing a want ad in the papers. Today we took a look at selection and placement. We also took a look at the realistic job preview and how important it is for employers to be forthcoming in telling the applicants what they can expect within that organization. That's going to do it for today. And tomorrow we're going to go a little bit more in depth with Chapter 7. So have a good day, and we'll continue on tomorrow.